What up, Wizards? It's Dev and Ziggy's down here, too. We all love Ziggy, and we are very close to Aetherdrift spoiler season now. At this point, we can smell the tires burning, the asphalt bubbling up. We know it's coming, everybody. But that said, I want to make one more little pit stop in Standard before we start looking at Aetherdrift cards, because Standard has actually progressed a good bit over this last 6 or 8 weeks that we've had access to Foundations. At first things were slow, right? But then we started getting little tastes of Selesnya Collector's Cage is a decent deck. And over the last few weeks, Esper Pixie and all of its variants have taken over. So we've seen some real progression in Standard, some new decks just about every week. And that's been exciting. But with all that said, there are still tons of cards that I think people should be giving a chance, either in one deck or another, or that maybe form a whole new deck. So let's take a look at 10 cards I think you should be playing in Standard.
And I'm your favorite Magic Channel's favorite Magic Channel. Best believe that the professor go bananas for my deck tech.
Classic SBMTG top 10 list, everybody. That's what helped put us on the map in the first place, baby. An honorable mention. This time it's very honorable mention-y. It's meticulous excavation. And my whole point is to again say the phrase Esper Pixie and then point at this card and be like, huh? Think about it. A couple things I like about this. If you don't have a Pixie or a Fear of Isolation or any of your other bouncy guys, then this just lets you bounce that Hopeless Nightmare back to your hand, right? It's a permanent. Just return a permanent you control to its owner's hand, which is actually a little bit gross in a deck with so many dumb permanents. Return the Nowhere to Run back to your hand and remove another creature seems pretty good. Return the Storm Chaser's Talent to your hand, even though you don't have a This Town ain't big enough. That sounds pretty dope too, right? You can even just return the Pixie or the, a Fear of Isolation to your hand, play them and bounce something else. You can use Meticulous Excavation to save permanents and other creatures and stuff that are about to die to removal. So even though the activated ability is a little mana intensive, I'll admit that, I still think it's really cheap to play in the first place. If you do have any eerie effects like Optimistic Scavenger in your deck, this helps trigger those for a really cheap price. I like that. But still, on later turns where you just have open mana sitting there, your opponent effectively can't target most of your stuff because you're just going to send it back to your hand and do something broken with it again. And I wouldn't suggest 4 of these in the Pixie deck or anything. I just think maybe you toy around with a 1 of, see where that takes you. You know what I mean? Because there might be something there, but again, is that 2 mana incentive for you? That's why it's the honorable mention. Number 10, the actual list. Let's get into some serious cards, right? Actually, it's Throne of the Grim Captain, which is kind of an honorable mention, but I actually think the Captain got way better with the release of the last couple of sets. Now, first of all, we've just recently gotten both a 2 and a 3 drop artifact creature that have changelings. So that seems like it'd be good for this deck, potentially, but if you want to play good cards in your Magic the Gathering deck, Foundations is a set for you, right? We just got the Red Bull 3 drop that has changeling, and that dude's pretty cool. But the real secret sauce for this deck is actually a card that's already seeing play in a bunch of other decks. It's Kiora the Rising Tide, right? This is a merfolk, so that checks out right there, but it also helps you put 2 cards into your graveyard to actually craft the Throne of the Grim Captain up, which is nasty. Alongside a turn 1 Senate Scout, turn 2 Throne of the Grim Captain, turn 3 Kiora. It really doesn't matter if they kill your guys or not. Turn 4, you could easily craft up Grim Captain, and that seems extremely broken to me. This deck just a few months ago did not have all of these very good cards that fit the theme. Plus, this deck can play Tashana's Tidebinder, Pugnacious Hammerskull. This deck does not have to play weak cards in order to be a decent deck. So I actually think people should revisit this idea because just in the last couple of sets, we've gotten so many OP cards for it. At number 9, I'm honestly having a hard time deciding between Perforating Artist and Alesha Who Laughs at Death, but I've been playing these things in the same deck. These are my 3 drops in a very low to the ground sort of Rakdos aggro deck that tops out at 3 on the curve, and they're my 3 drops. But if I had to actually say which one has performed better, it's Alesha Who Laughs at Death, man. Or Laughs at Fate. She smiles at death. She laughs at fate. I always forget the order of the words. Either way, this has actually been a gross card that often has a real effect on the table the turn it comes out. If you're able to mill or otherwise put a creature into your graveyard in the first couple of turns, then suddenly Alesha becomes really good the turn she comes out, and then she just gets better and better as turns go on. A lot of different things you can do with the Lesha, and even though I'm not sure that she's like the end-all be-all for the top end of the curve and everyone's missing it and I'm a genius, I do still think that if you haven't tried the card yet out, then maybe brew around it a little bit, because it does a lot of work in the aggro decks, especially against all the really effective, like, small ball black removal right now. If you're tired of your creature getting cut down on turn 1, go for the Throated on 3, then like Alesha's a pretty good 3-drop. Well, go for the Throated on 2, right? Then Alesha's a pretty good 3-drop. And my number 8 is Campus Renovation in light of recent developments. A lot of us have now seen the new Abuelo's Awakening deck from the last couple of weeks that's sort of slowly creeping up in terms of MTGO challenge and league results. You see it more and more now because it does not, in fact, fold to interaction. I had a lot of people, when we featured the deck on top 3 decks of the week, had a lot of people say the deck folded to interaction. I say it does not. And then we proved it on stream, because we played against that deck, and then the turn that they had Abuelo's Awakening, we had 2 open go for the throats in our hand, and we still lost, because it turns out when they have an Omniscience on the table, they get to counter your spells for free, you see. So the deck does not fold to interaction. It is not the Rakdos joins up Abuelo's Awakening hulking Metamorph deck from like 8 months ago. It's not that deck. It's way better than that deck. But again, in light of those events, I think it's maybe time that we reevaluate Campus Renovation, because that can also get back Omniscience. It lets us play Jeskai, which we might want to do for whatever reason, and it gives us a form of card advantage that doesn't look like it's good with Omniscience. Omniscience only lets you play cards for free from your hand. But that said, you can play all the cards in your hand for free, so that frees up your mana to spend on the card you exile with Campus Renovation. So that's a cool thing to note. Plus, there's other ways you can leverage this card, right? Like Portal to Phyrexia is in Standard right now. It seems like a pretty good thing to get back with it. So I've always liked Campus Renovation. I like, a Reanimator piece that gives you effective card advantage. That seems gross to me. And it's in a color combination that can leverage it pretty well too right now. So again, underrated card at this point, at least in my opinion. Now, my number 7 is Combat Research. In light of recent developments, I'm going to try to stay off that phrase for the rest of the video, but these aren't even recent developments, right? Ever since Duskmourn came out, we've understood that Enduring Curiosity is honestly one of the best cards in all of Standard. I was going to say maybe the best card in Standard. For the last, the World Championships, they asked a lot of players, what's the best card in Standard? And more of them than not said Enduring Curiosity. So with that in mind, I would think that Combat Research is actually a pretty dope card. Forget the legendary text on it, although, like, if you have a legendary creature, then that's good. But this is basically 1 mana to proc eerie effects, which I think is kind of important, right? If you do have Optimistic Scavenger or anything else that cares about, enchantments coming into play, then obviously that's pretty slick, Chief. But, apart from that, just a single mana to give, your creature that's wearing a Feather of Flight or is otherwise unblockable. The ability to draw cards for a single mana rather than 4 mana. This costs a quarter of the mana an Enduring Curiosity cost. And I know that Enduring Curiosity stays on the table for longer, and all that. It can draw you more than 1 card in a turn. These are all things that are obvious, right? But again, just triggering certain like eerie effects for only a mana and drawing an extra card every turn on your way to an Enduring Curiosity seems extremely good to me, and the kind of thing that, again, just like Meticulous Excavation, I'm not asking for a 4 of here, but it does seem like a 1 or 2 of in these like blue-white enchantments decks is a way to bring down the curve in some ways while still like drawing a lot of extra cards, which seems like exactly what that deck wants. Now, my number 6 is Fauna Shaman, and this follows the same trend as a couple of other cards on the list. I don't think that like Reanimator decks should play 4 of Fauna Shaman. I'm not sure how reliable it actually is. I think most of the time, Reanimator would rather pay than 2 or 3 mana and discard a card right now, guaranteed for sure, and not have to wait for Summoning Sickness or anything like that. That's the problem with Fauna Shaman, is that Cut Down exists, Go for the Throat exists, Anoint with Affliction exists, Get Lost exists. There's a lot of very efficient removal in Standard. They torch the tower this, you feel pretty bad about that because you never actually got to tutor your creature, or more importantly for the decks this is in a lot of the time, discard your card. So you'd rather play Bitter Triumph, discard your card. Liliana of the Veil, discard your card. I get the reasons this isn't played, but There are decks that I'd feel like, a one-of Fauna Shaman would work out very, very well because, you can use your Fauna Shaman to go get another creature that's integral to your Reanimator plan, whether it's Overlord of the Balemerc or Kiora the Rising Tide or something like that. And in the meantime, if they do burn a Get Lost on a Fauna Shaman, you can kind of console yourself with the fact that they did that in the first place. Like, hey, that's a really important removal spell. Fauna Shaman's not actually that important, so you kind of went off in that trade, but there are plenty of Sultai decks with like Coma and other huge dudes that I actually think this could work really, really well in. Like, if you're playing Cash Grab in your deck or something, and you're trying to put huge dudes in your yard with it, then I think maybe one slot for Fauna Shaman is something we could experiment with. My number 5, halfway down the list, is Crawling Barrens, an absolute house. Last time it was in Standard, and nobody's really paying much attention to it this time. It might be because we have better creature lands, right? We have the dual-colored creature lands, most of which are very good, especially like blue-black, blue-white. These are fantastic lands, and you don't really have to resort to a Crawling Barrens. Plus, the Demons decks are playing Soulstone Sanctuary, right? So, again, just like all the other cards, there are explanations, for why these cards aren't seeing play, but again, that all said, I think there's plenty of other decks for a card like Crawling Barrens. These mono white decks that end up on Fountain Port and Mirrex, I think they could squeeze a copy or two in and be okay with that. There's plenty of long game decks that play 6 to 8 sweepers, a couple of Day of Judgment and 4 Sunfalls or whatever. They're more or less sweeper deck, and traditionally, Crawling Barrens goes extremely well in decks like that, especially decks like mono white that have their own creatures, they have their own ways of exhausting their opponent's resources, their removal spells, the cards in their hand and all that. So by the time, it's turn 15 and you played your third sweeper spell and the board is clear and your opponent's out of cards in their hand, suddenly you just focus all your mana on Crawling Barrens and attack for 8. You can also keep this card from becoming a creature, right? If you don't have anything else to do with your mana at the end of your opponent's turn, you can just put 2+1/+1 counters on it, denying it from becoming a creature, right? And then your opponent can't target it with removal. But in this day and age, there's a surprisingly, low number of demolition fields for a format with so many creature lands and so many Fountain Ports. You just don't see demo fields very often, and I think we can take advantage of that by playing Crawling Barrens. Again, your opponent is down to top deck mode, they don't have a removal spell. Crawling Barrens is suddenly like the best creature in your deck, never mind land. So I'm saying, if your deck is just right, try this card if you haven't yet. It'll usually just end games by itself once you're able to position yourself correctly. And it still does that. We have a whole body of evidence to say that it does in fact do that from last time it was in Standard, and it still does. Anyway, we got to move on to number 4 here, which is Conduit of Worlds. I have brought this card up in a video similar to this like a year ago now at this point. I still believe in this card. Golgari is a pretty important deck at the moment, although it is going more and more out of fashion by the second. But, Terra Sunder and Glissa are still really, really good cards in Standard right now. Not to mention the occasional Innkeeper's Talent or whatever you'll see in that deck. The Vraska Innkeeper's Talent combo. There's so many ways to build Golgari at this moment, and there are a ton of extremely important permanents in that deck. Whether you lose your Glissa, you lose your Deep Cavern Bat, right? You lose your Sheldred, you lose your Unstoppable Slasher because they actually played 2 removal spells on it. They're going to feel like a jerk when they play Cut Down, Go for the Throat on your Unstoppable Slasher, and you just play it out of your graveyard with a Conduit of Worlds. It feels really, really good. And yeah, sometimes you'll have to skip a turn to play this card, but just like some of the other cards we've talked about, this is Silver Bullet status. You'll probably only play the 1 copy, and it's best drawn relatively late in the game when it's more of a card advantage piece than anything else. I think maybe you could make the statement that it's probably better to play Unholy Annex as a 4-of than fit this card into your deck, because that's good card advantage. But I'll counter by saying that this can play an Unholy Annex out of your graveyard, and that seems pretty good. Top 3 at this point, and this is where things get a little bit weird, I'd say. Number 3 is Krenko's Buzz Crusher. You know what I just got done saying a minute or two ago about how there's a ton of creature lands in this format. There's obviously Fountain Port, which every other deck plays, right? There's a ton of good non-basic lands people are rocking right now, and people aren't really doing too much about it. But Buzz Crusher is an un-go for the throatable, boltable, that's important, obviously unburst lightningable unless they want to lose mana value on it. a 4/4 flyer that comes into play and blows up their fountain port. And I think that's actually, that sounds very good to me. And there's some people in standard right now that you'll catch like not being able to grab a basic land off of this. So it's just like a way upgraded Avalanche Riders from time to time, which seems pretty okay, man. There's just not a lot of removal that can actually truly touch this right now outside of like Get Lost and a couple of other spells. So, it can't be Anoint with Affliction. That's a card people play. It can't be Nowhere to Run because it has the 4 toughness. Just, again, I think that this is actually an important stat line right now, and the Enter the Battlefield trigger is kind of crazy considering how many important non-basics are actually being played right now. So, again, just keep this thing on your radar. This is one of the few cards that like I don't really have like a deck for, you know what I mean? Like Fauna Shaman, Sultai Reanimator, Combat Research, blue-white enchantments or whatever, Campus Renovation, the Omniscience deck. This I'm not convinced. I'm not too sure. What do you play, Big Red or something? There's probably better 4-drops you could do in that deck, but I think there's got to be a home for this thing eventually, because right now, when it is resolved, it actually does like crazy work. Now, my number 2 is Cadaver Lab, and to a lesser extent, Defiled Crypt. Like, I think some people got excited about Defiled Crypt because it looks like it might go in, like, Insidious Roots and make that deck good, and by the way, it might. I don't know that enough people really tried that route, but I think this looks pretty good in Esper Pixie, for obvious reasons. I think this is 9.5 spots better than Meticulous Excavation, if that tells you anything. I have seen this pop up like literally once in an Esper Pixie list, but nowhere near enough. You've got to try this card. A 1 of, again, makes some sense, but I think you could boost this one up to as much as a 2 of, ladies and gentlemen. I actually think we're on that level, This can get back your Pixies or your Fear of Isolations, which for obvious reasons, that's really important, right? In a deck like this. But you can also, if you have the 5 mana, just, go ahead and get your 2/2, like play Defiled Crypt and then open up the Cadaver Lab, get a creature back from your yard, that makes it 2/2. And then you could bounce the Cadaver Lab with the Pixie and get your 2/2 again like next turn if you're into it. There's a lot of cool things this card does, At the end of the day, it's just Raise Dead, which is a card we've had access to since 1993, and it's never been like overly powerful or anything. But obviously, if your deck is built around extremely important creatures that function as the engine for your deck, and Pixie is, right? A single mana for something that synergizes with what the deck is doing anyway seems like a steal to me, man. I don't know, man. I think that this is a fantastic Magic card on a couple of levels. For what a lot of people are calling the best deck in Standard. I'm not sure if it's true, but a lot of people say it though. So, again, if you can find an extra slot for it in an already very tight deck list, I think it's probably going to pay dividends. But my number 1 is Kaito. And the reason he's not seeing enough play is probably Kaito. There's another Kaito in Standard that's just like, come on, like probably better than this one. It's the one you can ninjutsu into play for 3 mana, so they both effectively cost 3 mana. They both kind of want to be in a blue deck that's attacking with creatures. So if you're playing 3 mana for a Kaito, you're probably going to play the Dimir one because it's just like better. It's got hexproof and stuff. But I have been messing around with this one specifically in blue-white birds, which I know is like a really weird sounding deck, but also just mono blue, like budget mystic, the mischievous mystic deck that whenever you draw your second card a turn, you get to make up like a 1/1 bird token. But that deck is really, really fun on a lot of different levels, man. That deck is great, but Kaito is often the absolute best card in that entire deck. And he's great in the blue-white birds deck too, He wants to be in a deck that is attacking with early creatures. And right now, Dimir is actually a pretty good candidate, Like, again, the problem is that Dimir is using its slots on a different Kaito than this, but still, I think this one needs to be reevaluated, not just in that Dimir deck, but a couple of other, small ball aggro decks. By the way, blue-white birds is actually sick. You get to play the 2 mana like bird counterspell along with Aven Interrupter, so you get all these like ways to blow out the Sunfall and keep attacking with your creatures and flash them in. It's a really good deck. But Kaito goes well in that deck because this gives you like reliable card advantage, a planeswalker they have to deal with, a good ultimate, and more creatures. It's all just absolutely disgusting. So like Kaito has been good in just about everything that I've tried him in, just like Blue-White Birds. He's also the best card in that Mischievous Mystic deck by kind of a long shot. I'd rather see him than Klinquant Sky Mage or Mischievous Mystic, or even the 5 mana like Teferi Planeswalker that I've since cut down to a 1 of in that deck. He looks really good, but he's too expensive. Kaito, on the other hand, being 3 mana is a freaking steal for a thing that like makes creatures and draws cards, makes creatures unblockable, which you'll want in an attacking deck, obviously, and benefits from those creatures getting in unblocked. And obviously, again, one more pitch for Blue-White Birds. Your creatures are getting in unblocked a lot, so he's getting a fair number of loyalty counters. And once you hit that ultimate, you win the game. I don't know if you've experienced hitting this ultimate yet, but you win the game when you hit the ultimate, like most of the time. So just an outright freaking Alabama slam of a Magic card. But that is all I've got for this one. I appreciate you watching. I know we're really close to Aetherdrift spoilers and you don't care about Standard right now, but thanks for watching. I've been wanting to get this one off my chest for a while because there's a ton of cards in Standard that I really do think like deserve their moment, like now's the time, and no one's really paying enough attention to them because everyone's just like, ooh, Pixie, that's a good deck, but hell, 2 of these cards are for that deck. So just give them a shot again if you haven't. And of course, let me know what your favorite sort of like secret weapon cards are down there. Spread the information. I've done it. I know you can keep your cards a little close to the chest if you want to, but what I'd like is to see some more secret weapon cards down there in the comments. And apart from that, just do the YouTube stuff on your way out. Hit the likes before you hit the like. Hit the like before you hit the lights. There it is. It's a button shaped like a thumb. You'll see it down there. It throws off confetti and stuff when you hit it. I hear it's a big party. You can also subscribe to the channel. Need more subscribers, man. Haven't been the subscriber train has been slowing down lately. So maybe if you haven't subbed yet, do me a favor. It would mean a lot to me if you would, because spoiler season's a couple days away anyway. You probably want to get that content for sure when I upload it. Maybe you don't. Maybe you don't care. I hope you do. Either way, you made it to this point in the video, you care a little bit. So check out the Patreon if you feel like it. It's only $1 a month to help really support the channel, and you get to vote on what decks we do for Aetherdrift season when that happens. But anyway, guys, I'm going to get out of here for now. I'm going to rest up until Aetherdrift spoiler season starts. I am Deb from The Blaze. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind.